With his take on how NAFTA talks are going, Conservative leader Andrew Scheer joins me now. Mr. Scheer, it's great to have you on. I want to play a clip of the Prime Minister who was in Fort McMurray today and then get your reaction on that if we can.
We're pleased at the amount of chapters that have been closed, at the progress that has been made on a number of issues, but we're going to keep going and demonstrate that we take this issue very seriously. We'll continue to defend Canadian jobs, but we're hopeful to get positive news in the coming times. We're going to accept a good deal for Canada, not just any old deal.
There is word that there may be an agreement in principle that may be ready to sign in Peru at the Summit of the Americas next week. Can you at least give the government credit for coming as far as they have?
Well, I'll give the government credit in the sense that dealing with President Trump on trade is no easy task. Usually you have a president has a philosophical approach, either a free marketer or protectionist, and you can kind of see that applied across. Mr. Trump seems to have a sector-by-sector approach all through the lens as to whether or not the U.S. has a trade surplus or a trade deficit in each specific commodity, which is not a conventional way to adopt that. We've been critical of the Liberal response early on. We think that they were late to the game in building the alliances throughout the U.S. that we needed to build to get American pressure on the U.S. administration. That started to happen recently, but we'd have liked to have seen it earlier. We've been supportive of the government's efforts. I led a Conservative delegation down to Washington to show that united front. We want to help. We want Canada to get the very best deal that we can. This is so important. It transcends political lines. Encouraged to see the focus on actual market access and trade. You'll remember the Liberals are trying to bring in a lot of social policy into the negotiations. That didn't seem to go well. We hear a lot of talk that they've now pulled back from that and are focusing more on the economics and the reduction of trade barriers. We'll have to wait and see what comes out, though. No one has any details on specifics. We don't know if this is just a general agreement with not a lot of details or if this is a more substantial conclusion. We'll have more to say once we actually know what's in the deal.
One of the issues that you have not been supportive of is the government's plan when it comes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. You have spoken out strongly about the carbon tax, and this was one of the issues that has come up during the Prime Minister's tour of Western Canada. First of all, do you believe that global warming is man-made?
I believe that human beings absolutely have an impact on climate change. I believe that human beings emit all kinds of things into our environment that we need to address, that we need to reduce what we do emit into the environment.
So if it's not a carbon tax, I haven't heard you talk much about what your plan is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Well, keep in mind that the previous Conservative government actually reduced emissions without a carbon tax. We did that through incentivizing efficiencies, with and encouraging people to all kinds of things, from retrofitting their homes to regulating emissions on a sector-by-sector approach. I believe it's possible, but I'd like to flip this around a little bit, because here we have the Environment Minister and the Prime Minister both not being able to say how much the carbon tax will reduce emissions by. They were asked point-blank questions. The Minister of Environment at committee, Justin Trudeau, by myself, in question period. I asked him, by how much will emissions go down with a carbon tax? They don't have an answer. So I would challenge them to say, what is the proof that a carbon tax actually works? Canadians don't support it. It hasn't given us the so-called social license to get important energy projects built.
But there are targets that Canada has signed on to in the Paris Accord. So if you were to be Prime Minister after next year's election, is that an accord that you would stay in, or would you withdraw from that?
Well, we voted in favor of the motion upholding the Paris Accord targets. I would also point out that after campaigning against the Conservative targets for reductions of greenhouse emissions, Justin Trudeau went to Paris and signed on to the exact same targets that Conservatives were proposing. So he's adopted our approach on this. But one thing that's not our approach is a carbon tax. I'm against it. I will repeal it. I don't believe it will reduce emissions. I think that there's a more positive way to incentivize people and companies to reduce emissions without just grabbing more money from the economy.
I want to talk a little bit about the Atwal affair and switch gears. Today, you are now saying that you will not accept this private classified briefing until MPs get one that's unclassified. Is there a danger here? Are you worried that you're overplaying your hand? I mean, you know, there's a filibuster in the House. MPs were up for a long time. You can basically just claim victory and walk away. Why this new demand now?
It's not a new demand. When you look at the letter that I sent the clerk of the Privy Council, it was saying, look, we'll have a briefing and we'll have it all together, and we'll go through all the publicly available information that can be disseminated publicly, and then anything classified, I will stay and receive that. In a counter response, the clerk, Daniel Jean, has effectively indicated that he'd be willing to go to committee. The reason why I'm concerned about this is because just a few weeks ago, Justin Trudeau used his majority on that committee, on the very committee that now Daniel Jean is offering to go in front of, used his majority to vote against inviting him to committee. So their track record on this is not one that I have a lot of confidence in. They voted against the motion to invite him to testify. They put their MPs through 20 hours of a marathon vote in order to avoid the very thing that now we're seeing. So all I've said to the Privy Council office is, great, happy to have a classified briefing. Let me know when the public briefing takes place, and then we can work on a date after that. I believe it's so important. Why the cover-up? Why are they going to such great lengths to avoid what was already told to reporters and journalists being told to Parliament? We have conflicting information. Ralph Goodale, the Minister of Public Safety, says that if we want to know information, we can read it all in the media because it's all been reported. But then we have journalists who were on the call, on that conference call, saying, no, we were told not to report some things. So someone's not saying something that's true, and we want to get to the bottom of this.
So walk me through this. I mean, when will that briefing happen with you, and when will it happen with the committee?
Well, as my understanding is that Mr. Jean has reached out to the chair of the committee, the Liberal chair. We want that to happen very quickly. We want Liberals on that committee to support the idea of having a public hearing on this. We understand that there are some things that the National Security Advisor would know that's classified, that can't be said in a public format. That's fine, and he can instruct the committee as to when that happens. But everything that was said to journalists and reporters, I believe it's only right that the Canadian people have their elected representatives hear the same thing. After that, I will very quickly find the right time to have that briefing on the classified side, as was offered to me. I think that's important too.
I also want to get your reaction. We know that Rob Ford, who is vying to be Ontario's premier, is not going to have a campaign bus for journalists. What's your reaction to that?
I really don't have one. I don't know the logistics of running.
You must, be able to say something about that. Do you support the idea or not?
Look, every individual campaign will come up with their own media strategy. I have a media plan myself. I try to be as accessible as I can and speak to journalists when they're covering topics that they want to hear my voice on. We'll have our own plan for the federal campaign.
But this is a guy, if you're prime minister, you might have to work alongside. I mean, can you say, you have talked about the role of the media. The previous Conservative government had somewhat of a fractious relationship with the media. Do you endorse Mr. Ford's plan?
I really don't have views on how other people run their campaigns. When I ran for the leadership, I had my own plan. I was often asked to comment on other people's style or other people's campaign. I do my own thing. I run my own campaign. I'll be happy to work with the next Premier of Ontario on issues. Hopefully it's a Conservative Premier who wants to repeal the carbon tax, who wants to balance the budget and lower taxes. We'll work together on issues. I'm not going to weigh in on how he runs his campaign, whether or not he has a media bus or prints certain types of flyers.
Well, let me ask you this. Are journalists going to be allowed on your campaign bus in the campaign next year and on the plane?
You know what? We haven't actually got to the point where we know exactly what we're doing in terms of buses and planes, but we'll have a healthy contingent of media officials at our events. And it's important that I get my message out to as many people as I can. And of course, the traditional media will be important, as will new media, as will new platforms to communicate to Canadians.
All right, Mr. Scheer, great having you on. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.